I think we'll start now. Good evening. Thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day. We haven't had too many this year in Chicago, but this bodes well, I think, for the rest, hopefully the rest of the month and the months to follow. My name is Greg Light. I'm the director of the Searle Center for Teaching Excellence. I know many of you. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's 2008 President Teaching Series. The Searle Center engages with faculty and students through a diverse range of educational programs and research projects aimed at advancing learning across the university, and learning really is our focus, how students learn, how faculty learn as well. In this series, we celebrate Northwestern's active support and commitment to high-quality teaching and student learning by inviting a speaker of national stature to address our faculty on current issues of teaching and of learning. I'm delighted to announce that this year's talk is also co-sponsored by Northwestern Center for Engineering Education Research, NCER for short, which started last year, was started mainly by Ann McKenna and Rob Linsenmeyer, but there are a number of other people who are behind it. And we're delighted as a center to work with them. Their goals, they were established with goals to improve educational processes to ensure that U.S. engineers are in the best position to adapt new challenges, including globalization, throughout their careers. We're also extremely fortunate to have a president, and I say this over now 7 years of working with this president on these kinds of talks, who recognizes the critical important role that excellence in teaching and learning plays in institutions' vitality and future success. So I'm going to ask our president to come up and introduce our speaker tonight. So please join me in welcoming the man who I think is really responsible for this wonderful occasion. Without his support, none of this would be possible. Please welcome President Henry Beaton.
Thank you, Greg. Well, the President's Teaching Series is indeed a statement that we care a great deal about teaching at a research university. And I think I say every year that we never see teaching and research as hands of a balance, but quite the contrary. We see them as working with each other rather than against each other, and think it's really important that we do both very well at this university, and we care a lot about it. And speaking of teaching with respect to engineering, I think one of the first curricular changes that took place in my time, which is now almost 13, 14 years ago, was when then Jerry Cohn, now the late Dean Jerry Cohn, came to me and talked about a revision of the engineering curriculum. We introduced engineering first in order to rework how we were teaching engineering, which I think some of you, certainly Steve, will remember, was a very important innovation in the engineering curriculum. So I am now very pleased to introduce Professor Alice M. Agogino, and I look forward to her talk as well as you do too. What does it really mean to teach undergraduates in a world that's becoming increasingly globalized, and what are the implications specifically for engineering education and for other disciplines across the academy? These are some of the questions that are raised by our speaker today, and she spent many years carefully considering what the future holds for engineers as they meet the technical and social challenges brought by an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. Alice M. Agogino joins us this evening from the University of California at Berkeley. I was just with your chancellor a few days ago in D.C., where she is the Roscoe and Elizabeth Hughes Distinguished Professor of Mechanical Engineering. She received her PhD from the Department of Engineering Economic Systems at Stanford University in 1984. Prior to joining the faculty at UC Berkeley, she worked in industry for Dow Chemical, General Electric, and SRI International. Her research interests include artificial intelligence, decision and expert systems, and gender ethnic equity. She's authored over 170 scholarly publications and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. At Berkeley, Dr. Agogino teaches courses on new and green product development, design theory, and designing technologies for girls and women. Highly recognized for her teaching and mentoring, she's been distinguished with the Pi Tau Sigma Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Ralph R. Teeter Education Award, the NSF Directors Award for Distinguished Teaching Scholars, the Chancellor's Award for Advancing Institutional Excellence, and the Faculty Award for Excellence in Graduate Student Mentoring. Outside of the university, Dr. Agogino has served on a number of governmental, professional, and industry advisory committees, including the NSF Advisory Committee for Engineering, the NAE Engineering of the Year 2020 Planning Steering Committee, the National Academy's Board on Science Education, and the Women in Academic Science Engineering Committee of the National Academy's Committee on Science, Engineering, and Public Policy. It's my pleasure to introduce a fine and wonderful scholar and educator, Alice M. Agogino. Her topic for today is Educating Engineers for a Flat World, Implications Across the Academy.
There we go. Interesting, you saw my chancellor a couple days ago. I saw him yesterday at Yale. So we found out that at UC Berkeley, the greatest contribution of faculty greenhouse gases is the travel. So we've got to figure out how to be in two places at once. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to come here and address a more general audience. I was just saying during the reception that I actually started out in college in anthropology, and one of the few people my junior year to transfer from anthropology to mechanical engineering, and I had to compress everything because for some reason when you're young, when you're 21, you think you gotta, not graduate later than everyone else. So I had to compress everything. But I very much valued the 2 years that I spent in anthropology and what I learned from the social sciences. So I was involved with a number of studies with the National Academy that I thought I might integrate together and then look at the implications more broadly across the whole academic institution, because I think that the issues that we highlighted in our studies of undergraduate engineering education really have ramifications across the academy. So the first study that I was involved with is called the Engineer 2020 study. And the idea with this study was to first understand what industry thought the world would be like in the year 2020, and what kind of environment our students would be going into so that we could work backwards and figure out how to make them effective in that brave new world of 2020. So the first volume actually is phase one, heavily industry-driven kind of volume about at least their predictions. And it wasn't technology predictions. And I think what was really important about this, and I actually did a little work with SRI with the Futures Institute, is you're going to fail predicting technology. I mean, the internet wasn't predicted 1 year before Mosaic came about. I mean, you're not going to succeed very well. It's going to be out of date as soon as you predict it. Alan Kay, I don't know if you know, Alan Kay was a member of our committee, as his famous quote, "The way to predict the future is to create it." But we looked at what we thought were the broader driving forces and what the social technological implications were as well, and then work backwards from that. So more looking at what would be the engineering climate. And then the second volume was actually the academic response to what we thought the working world would be like in the year 2020. And so these are some of the technology drivers that came out of this heavily industry-driven study. And there probably aren't any surprises here. They're a trend that you would see today, but just a growing complexity of our life at many levels, nano to macro scale, information technology, the heavy influence of complex, both small scale and large scale systems, and the growing integration of biology. Some people have talked about computer science and information technology really being what drove the last part of the previous century, and that the integration of the biological sciences is what's going to be driving the first part of our century as well. Those were the broad-based technological drivers. And with an aging population, with diseases, with interesting opportunities to go from the micro scale to the macro scale and systems using bio-related technologies, there are all kinds of possibilities here to regenerate tissues, drug delivery systems, bio-inspired computing, various biological biomimetics models as well. Micro nano, we're seeing many of those today. There are a lot of trade-offs there and sociological issues associated with the risk associated with mostly nanotechnology, not so much microtechnology. But you know, the concepts are overwhelming, and Eric Drexler is really a cheerleader of nanotechnology. He's more a journalist than anything else, but he envisions all of these wonderful possibilities as we get smaller and smaller at a small scale. Environmental cleaning agents that will clean surfaces, chemical detection agencies, ultra-fast, ultra-dense circuits, and then a factory large enough to make 10 million nanocomputers per day might actually fit on the edge of one of today's integrated circuits, is a picture from Drexler's book. But other areas of nanotechnology looking at materials and photonics, smart materials which have the ability to sense and respond, and there are any number of research projects and some products in the market that do that now, that remember, so the bridges that would respond in earthquakes to be able to go back to their original configuration, smart textiles, and actually we've got a project that does this now, part of our Seguro project for protecting farm workers, but that can actually control and regulate the temperature of your body as well. The physical size of optical sources is decreasing while the power and reliability is increasing, and so all kinds of interesting photonic applications, including smart lighting that would respond to the sun. And then the explosion in information technology. A couple quotes here. I like Feldman's 2001 quote, which he said in 2001, and it's amazing he said this in 2001 because it seems almost silly today. Today, a gigabyte hard drive ships in a package. They used to call those the pizza boxes package. Soon will be a 10 gigabyte drive, and computers will be small enough to fit in trouser pockets and be able to contain information that would fill a modern library. This was supposed to be astounding in 2001. It doesn't surprise us now. The speed and computing power in future desktop machines and software will enable us to design all kinds of capabilities to release us for creative tasks. We'll see. I don't think we're quite there yet on whether we have been released for creative tasks. So I started out in anthropology, and so going over history has always been interesting to me. And so this is just an example of the information explosion just in healthcare. And you can see going from 1990 to 2010, the data management, just look at the curve, goes up exponentially, and people talk about Moore's law in computer chips or integrated circuits, but the information technology just in one field is growing much faster. And my father actually was what's called an early man archaeologist, which meant he was looking at around 20,000 years ago. So I'm very interested in going back 40,000 years. And I thought it was interesting, this curve that looked at data from 40,000, sort of looking at the amount of information that maybe cavemen had in the year 40,000, and then going over the years here to the year 2003 in terms of this exponential jump in the information technology we have. Well, what's interesting over that same time period, our bodies haven't changed a whole lot. Our brains have not changed a whole lot in the last, we're Homo sapiens, they were Homo sapiens. Our ability to manage and process that information hasn't changed a whole lot from a biological standpoint. So we have to look at what are the cognitive scaffolds that we can use to understand this information. And this is why many of us feel the information overload today. The other thing that our industry colleagues helped us with was trying to identify a prioritized list of what are the big problems that we'll be facing in the year 2020. And the environment and the energy was #1 on the list. Bioengineering and bio-anything, including medical, the aging population, was next. Again, this micro scale, understanding both ultra and the miniaturization. Population growth and many issues associated with urban growth and population growth, managing globalization and part of this flat world idea of diverse customers and suppliers, and then keeping up with it all, staying on top of all the latest technology and understanding all the sociological issues we need to keep track of as well. And so just, I mean, the book goes through a lot of detail in terms of the resources here. And I just thought, since today is the anniversary of the first Earth Day, that I would pull out something that talks about drivers in the environment. Well, the American Lung Association says 3/4 of the U.S. population reside in areas of unhealthy air. In the year 2020, California is going to need who knows how much more energy. It depends on what we do. Estimates are maybe 40%. 50% of the world's original forest cover has been depleted, according to the World Watch Institute, and a global per capita forest area is projected to fall to 1/3 of its 1990 value by the year 2020. 48 countries, 3 billion people are estimated to face freshwater shortages in the year 2025. And this last one I thought was interesting because we were given access to CIA data. Now, I don't normally read CIA data, so this one was really interesting, although it should be no surprise here. What is a surprise is why the CIA tracks this, and it really makes sense. The wealthiest 16% of the world consumes 80% of the world's natural resources. So by the year 2020, there'll be 8 billion people who will further depleting the environment, fuel instability because of the inequity of these resources. And it's been estimated we may need another 4 to 7 planet Earths if the rest of the world consumed the resources at the same rate that we do. So technical and socio-technical issues involved there. So to summarize what they came out with, the most important social technological challenges were a number of issues associated with physical infrastructures in urban settings, continuing issues of security and information and computing infrastructures, the aging population, and the aging population is really interesting because the demographics change all over the map in terms of what country you come from. Yesterday, I actually was at Yale at a meeting of the presidents of 10 international universities, University of Tokyo being one, and Japan actually is the country that has the biggest baby bust problem because they are not going to have a population to support the elder people right now. And it's a great concern to them on how they are going to help their elderly population. They don't have the population to support their elders. The environment, sustainable engineering, complex interdisciplinary problems, managing globalization. And in this world of complexity, people want more and more and higher quality. We are demanding more. Consumers will demand more. They want higher quality, mass customization. Not only that, they want it to be personalized for them. And I remember I forget when this came out, maybe 1995 or 1996. I remember the first night I went to the National Academy and I was staying at the hotel and I had this bag that I carried with me and I had a phone cable. And I was really upset that the hotel room didn't have one of those little stands where I could put my phone cable in so I could use the modem on my computer. 2 years later, I'm upset because I don't have high-speed internet connection in that room, or I don't have wireless in that room. So our expectations are going up as well. The social political tensions around the world and the growing diversity and lack of diversity in the workplace. And I'll talk about that a little more. And then what roles engineers play in the future. And this is one of the areas where there's something called the 3 Ps in futures research. There's the possible, the probable, and the preferable. And on this list, I'm not sure where we're at on that spectrum because I think a number of the folks from industry were really looking at the preferable. How can we torque the system to get there? Because there's a real interest in having the engineering profession really to act like a profession. But the notion of the globalization of industry and engineering practice, so the whole flat world issue, the shift of engineering away from the big multinationals. It used to be, in fact, when I graduated as an undergraduate, everybody worked from the General Electrics or the Dow Chemicals or the big multinationals. That's changed now. And even our first-year students are thinking of going to product design firms, or my understanding is Northwestern, a number go to relatively small or large consulting firms as well. So the growing share of engineering employment going into non-technical or more broadly construed technology and service economies as well. and then the role that all of this technology plays in our everyday practice. So I just want to connect that to what did Friedman talk about, who's the New York Times journalist who wrote The World is Flat. And what did he say were the major drivers? And, you know, it should come as no surprise, though he highlighted some other things. He felt the fall of the Berlin Wall was going to tilt a worldwide balance of power towards democracy and free markets. The Netscape IPO he cites as sparking massive investment in internet technology, including optic cables, workflow software, closer coordination, thinking about that in terms of employees, outsourcing, self-organizing communities, and all these collaborative communities, wireless technologies, making personalization and mobile technologies possible, and then all of this supply chain stuff, the outsourcing, migrating business functions to, say, India, saving money in third world economy. And he talks a lot about India and gives some examples of India, which I'm going to India for my first time. I've actually not been there this summer. I'm doing the trainer on sustainable product design, and I'm finding out some really distorted things that are going on in India because of all of the IT and outsourcing that's going to India. For example, I found out that faculty don't want to teach anymore because they can get more work working as a technician for these IT firms. So they're losing some of their top engineering faculty working basically as technicians and service managers in Bangalore. Offshoring, contract manufacturing, looking at quality. We are, in some ways, it's good news, it's bad news, but we're losing track of what's called the supply chain, so that when we outsource to some of these countries, we lose track of the quality of what's actually happening, and there's been those toxic problems in China because of that. It makes it easy. We can just offshore, but there are a lot of issues associated with that. The whole supply chaining and robust networks, all kinds of increased efficiencies associated with that. Insourcing logistics helps small companies to actually be and act like big companies. And you've seen the UPS and FedEx commercials that try to highlight that even the small company can have a global presence. And what's called, he calls informing search engines that allow everyone to have their own personal supply chain. One of the things he talks about is you can sell yourself as an individual on the market as well. And so I thought I would just go for a quote through one of the industry speakers that worked with us, Phil Condit, who was at the time CEO of Boeing, where he's talking about what the multinationals are doing. And it turns out that we had HP there, other companies there. At the time, they were targeting at least 10% of their engineering employees were going to be outsourced to India and China. And I don't know what it is now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher. But he was painting a rosy picture of why this is good. So I'll see if this video works.
Could you connect this to
Is there a light
the
thing?
new economy or the major changes that are predicted in the global economy?
The spotlight, too.
I really think that it means that an engineer can apply their skills, their capabilities on a global basis. Example today, we have a design office in Moscow. Now, during our night, they are working on designs. They move those designs back to the U.S. electronically at the end of their day, and they're worked on here. And then they go back to Moscow at night. It allows a process to go on 24 hours a day, but it also means that an engineer's skills are available globally. I can market my capability, not just where I am, but on a much broader basis. That will change a number of things, and I think create new opportunities.
Yep. So, these new opportunities are interesting.
Could you ask them to turn off that spotlight?
Do you have control of the lights? There's a spotlight that's shining down on the audience. Is it possible to dim that? The one's here. Does that help? So this is one of my research projects is wireless moats that you can attach Any other suggestions? Is it dim enough for you? Is it? It's still not good. It's shining straight down on people, I guess, is the issue. Can we go on? Is that good enough? See, people want higher and higher quality. You just can't settle for less. You know, so you listen to Phil Condit, and you know, it really sounds like a rosy picture. All of us can have an international market instead of my just worrying about, can I work in Berkeley? I can sell my services, you know, in India and China and everywhere else. You know, the problem is they're paying them a quarter to a fifth of what we're getting paid here. So yes, you can do that, but your salary will be significantly lower. And I asked HP how much they were paying some of the engineers in India and China, and that was indeed the case. It may be a factor of, you know, at least 25% of what they would pay an engineer here. And so the question is, are we graduating students that are 4 times or 5 times more productive than some of the students that are graduating from China and India? So it's an interesting question. Do you think you are? Anne, help me out.
Rob says 2 times.
2 times, okay. I mean, clear the issue. I mean, the answer is always, are we the engines of creation? Are we creating the companies that are starting the supply chain? And that is a unique skill that you just don't farm out. When they came up with a list of what they thought the most important attributes were of our engineering graduates, and so this is what I want to get to, the broader academic environment. Because if you look at this list, not many of them would be what would be called traditional engineering courses that you would take in this area. They actually added the possess strong analytical skills later, but exhibit practical ingenuity, possess creativity, good communication skills, communication with multiple types of stakeholders, business and management skills, leadership abilities, high ethical standards, a strong sense of professionalism, the ability to be agile, resilient, flexible, lifetime learners, the ability to frame problems in a social, technical, and operational context. Now, those of you that aren't in engineering, do you think the engineering faculty excel in teaching these areas? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Was this the wrong question?
I think they're okay with ethical standards.
Yeah? Okay. In some ways, it's part of the professionalism. But you can see that this is much broader. I mean, this is an opportunity. Northwestern is one of the leaders, actually, in drawing on the broader academic community in terms of integrating, say, the literature and communication skills, even at the freshman level, into the design program. So I think what's happening here at Northwestern is really an excellent model of doing that. I think there's a lot more that we could build on, though. I'm delighted to see people from the performing arts here. One of my students is in dance, and she uses the expression of dance to help in her communication. We don't do that, you know, enough, and I think there's a lot more. The role of rhetoric and storytelling in design is becoming very important in product design. How do you communicate the emotives associated with a product? And so the whole rhetoric and storytelling is becoming both a research issue and a product development issue. So I think there are implications across the academy on this. One thing I was interested in reflecting on my teaching, because I teach design both at the freshman level, the senior level, and at the graduate level in a very multidisciplinary way, is I was curious about what part of my courses really impacted students after they graduated. So I asked them at the end of the semester, we have an exercise to find out what they thought was important at the end of the course. And then I conducted a longitudinal study to look at what they thought was important 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so what are those nuggets? And I'm going to give you an example of a course that was consistent over those years just for the consistency. Our human-centered product design course taught between multidisciplinary, our School of Business, engineering, our information school, and then we draw in students across the campus like architecture and biology, and then a third of the students that come from another college of industrial designers and artists, because we don't have an industrial design program, the California College of Arts. Multidisciplinary teams of 4 to 6 students. We go heavily on human-centered design and needs assessment at the beginning, but we go through the whole product development process. We also get design coaches from industry, experienced coaches from places like IDEO and Frog Design and Lunar Design. Just a couple of examples of projects here. Some of them do have social implications in terms of reducing pesticides for poisoning, pesticide poisoning, building sustainable cultural features into homes for the Pomo Indian Reservation, how to be cool when you go shopping in San Francisco was the Metro Mule project. So in the reflection, in the self-reflection, and it is interesting because the faculty reflect as well, and so while the faculty and the design coaches reflect, we have the students come in, and this is their assignment on the last day of class. Reflect on the experience you've had working with your team this semester. Capture 8 to 10 key lessons you have learned from the experience and put it on Post-it notes and bring it to class. We follow some of the research that has shown that you get rid of groupthink and you get more individual and creative ideas more broadly if people first think individually and then they bring that to the group. So they brought that to the group and then they help cluster them with a group. And over 3 years in this study, and I've done it over more years, but the results are pretty consistent, we had about 200 students and 1,300 lessons learned. And then we merged them over the years. And what the students felt at the end of the semester was that team learning was the most important thing we taught, which is kind of interesting because the students have been on teams in other courses. They've been thrown into projects all their life. The MBA students have worked in industry for 5 years. I mean, these are not novices. So, but it was very interesting. This was the first time they really worked with true multifunctional teams. The teams were formed to be multifunctional, and we covered a lot of iteration of how to develop high-performing teams. Next on the list was really understanding the customer and user needs. There were some logistic things, but those were the first two. Some of the things that we put a lot more time into, quite frankly, like prototyping and concept selection and project management were rated much lower at the end of the semester. Financial economic, Norman, came lower on bottom of the list there. We do cover it, but it came bottom of the list. And then, you know, just some quotes. The greatest number of things were the multidisciplinary teams. It's great to have people who are good at to work with people who are good at different things. So appreciating the peer learning and what everyone brings to the table. People with different backgrounds sometimes speak different languages, and they didn't mean this, you know, in a native language sense. They meant in the way they viewed the world. Variety of backgrounds helps with division of labor, but leads to more misperceptions and greater tensions. And there were a lot of issues associated with tensions. And the best performing teams are the ones that use the tension to promote creativity and use those differences of opinion in a constructive way. Obviously, the teams that used it in a destructive way didn't do so well at the end of the semester. Then I compared this list to what students said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years out after graduation. And working in multifunctional teams was still at the top of the list. But what I found interesting was that moving up was conceptual design, the creativity, the innovation, the conceptual design and feedback from the prototyping, and then understanding the user needs next. So I think we were on the right track, but as you recognize here, again, these wouldn't necessarily be skills that you would think would be in a traditional engineering curriculum. And we went over things like design for manufacturing and financial analysis and a lot of quantitative techniques, including life cycle analysis, but this is what stuck with them and what they thought when they worked in industry after getting their degrees that was most important. And these are the skills that I call the hot skills. Sometimes people call them soft and hard skills. I don't like soft and hard. I like hot and cold. These are the hot skills that our engineers need to know. Now, in this wonderful flat world, there seem to be some inconvenient mountains along the way. I mentioned the disparity in the salaries. There's a lot of uneven distribution of who's benefiting from the flat world, the haves and haves not. This little photograph, I think, came from, might have been a New York Times article, The Greedy Corporate Figure. Title was Thomas Friedman's Analysis Overlooks Fundamental Realities that most of the world people still need to wake up to. 3 to 4 billion people are making less than $2 a day. Sometimes it's called the bottom of the pyramid. That there's a huge number of people in this world of the free market that are making less than $2 a day. Is our free market serving their needs as well? And could it? IT is really interesting to India. It has got to have tremendous benefits, but it's totally distorting the economy from what I understand. They cannot, at least in their middle schools, the IITs, which are their top schools, which serve a very tiny part of their population, most of their universities are having a heck of a time retaining their faculty, and the best faculty leave to do basically menial jobs in the IT industry in Bangalore. Little project-based service learning in India. So I have my projects, my students go out and do a lot of projects. I have students who are doing human-centered design in Inner Mongolia, the Seguro project, the Pomo Nation more locally, Bangladesh, removing arsenic in Bangladesh, the Darfur stove in Darfur. But in India, we have a number of projects of students going in India. And again, this whole greenhouse thing, why are we flying middle-class American students to India to do human-centered design? I mean, there's a lot of human-centered design that we could do locally. And so when I was asked to do a train the trainer for faculty in India, in these middle universities, I kind of jumped on the opportunity because I think if you are going to have an impact in greenhouse gases, it's China, India, US, and I'm also working with Mexico, and I'm doing projects with all of them and doing that. But I wanted my students that were going to India to meet up with the faculty I would be training in India so their local students could do project-based learning and go out and do human-centered design in their local community. And I'm finding out in this pre-questionnaire that I sent out to the people that are to be my students that they don't do that. Engineering in India seems to do very little project-based learning, and very little of it is in the area of service learning. And the sense I'm getting is they want to compete in the broader world. They want to have their students work for the HPs and not to actually help the human condition locally. At least that's what I'm getting in the survey. When I actually talk to the people, maybe it'll be different. And then, of course, the U.S. companies outsourcing and the change in the salaries and what does all that mean. The other issue of all that means, what does that mean in terms of the demographics? We already know that we have a huge problem in diversifying the engineering profession. Now, what are the implications in the flat world in terms of this diversification? Well, one, as Shirley Jackson, who is on our committee, likes to talk about, again, let's look locally. Women and minorities are not underrepresented. They are the underrepresented majority in this country, and they're the underrepresented majority in engineering. They represent 1/2 to 2/3 of the population of the US. They are the new majority. And so she goes on to talk about our competitiveness really has to draw on the strengths of our own diversity. And if you compare again the science and engineering workforce to the US workforce, you see differences in terms of the contributions of blacks or African Americans, Hispanics, whites, and Asians. And there's a mismatch there. What do you think that's going to look like in a projection in the year 2020? Is it going to get better or worse? What is the rate that we're increasing the number of underrepresented, or the majority, underrepresented majority in the engineering ranks? Every year we increase it by how much? 1%, maybe. Every year, how's the demographics in the population changing? Absolutely. Right, so California is a majority minority, if you don't even include women's state. So you might see something like this. So the gaps are going to get even greater in the future. We are not moving fast enough. And if you, I'm personally concerned also about the gender inequities as well. I mean, our progress is incredibly slow. Everybody's working hard, but the progress is incredibly slow. So one thing I always like to do is oversample the people that we're really looking at and try to understand the problems. You can look at the statistics, but you get a lot more information when you do qualitative analysis. So we did some focus groups with minorities, underrepresented minorities, underrepresented majorities, maybe I should say at this point. And so these were a summary of some of the things they said. Changes in the culture and better equity is absolutely important. And by the way, I need to express the pain and angst of the people in the audience. You know, I thought I had seen it all because I've had my own issues. I've had all kinds of things happen to me personally in my life. I am a bowl of happiness and cherries and everything else compared to what I heard from these people. They were devastated. It was, you know, I felt like this was Suicide City in talking to people with this focus group. It was amazing the depth of their depression and how they felt they were being treated in the engineering profession. I thought I'd seen it all. I was shocked that even I was shocked. They felt, I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry those people in performing arts. I know that sounded stupid. They felt that there needed to be more emphasis on problems that addressed the human condition, social issues. They really wanted to give back to the communities. They looked at where the money was going. And so when I talked about the technology drivers, I mean, there was huge money going into nanotechnology. You know, I got my nano grant. I have a nano grant. There's huge money in nanotechnology. How much is going into improving African-American education in your community? You know, I mean, what are the big social issues, and are we having comparable funding in each of these areas? That's what they felt was inequitable. The lack of access to engineering careers. If you miss out and you didn't take the right math courses, you didn't take the right physics courses in high school, you were out doing something like selling drugs or something else that all your other friends were doing, you don't have a chance in high school. You don't have a chance in college. And you may not have a chance in college, you certainly don't have a chance in engineering, which usually has much higher standards along many of these dimensions. And if you do get there, you're a minority, you feel you don't have enough peers who share your values with you as well. And so not being able to get out of the system and get into the system is very hard for some populations. I guess I can share that today I said I got expelled from high school. It wasn't actually hard for me to get back into the system. I got expelled my junior year in high school for my writing. I said controversial things and I was illegally expelled, but I got into the system. It really wasn't that hard to get back into the system. But if I had been a low-income person who didn't have parents that had education, it probably would have been the end of higher education for me. So that was something that they felt very strongly about. They also felt that even though we say we value diversity, they didn't believe it. They looked at the actions, they looked at what people actually did, they looked at people that were being overlooked, they looked at requests, and they didn't believe it. So what they thought strategies for getting there and in diversifying the engineering profession was include their voices. They were surprised, that I did this focus group. They felt that on power committees at universities, they weren't on power committees. They weren't part of key decision-making processes. They wanted to oversample and have visual images, too many white men images in a lot of the engineering media. They wanted a strong and visible action with political leadership, and they particularly wanted to have engineering faculty address K through 12 issues and not leave it to someone else, like schools of education. The K through 12 is a key issue. Engineers are problem solvers, and there are key problem-solving issues that they wanted to work with in engineering. So that was kind of a different message that was coming out. And that's, in the US, what is all this stuff about supply chain and outsourcing saying about all of this? Well, before I get to that, I just want to end with one kind of controversial recommendation here in terms of access. And it's controversial because, well, I don't know, you tell me why it's controversial. I don't know why it's controversial. It seems straightforward to me. One of the recommendations is there should be more flexibility in putting engineering on the same basis of other professional schools. So, for instance, in engineering, it was one of the first professional schools. As time has moved on from the 1900s to today, medicine didn't even have degrees when it first practiced at the first part of the 1900s. There weren't law schools, really. Pharmacies are fairly new, and occupational therapy. Now, engineering is pretty much the only profession that you can practice professionally with only a bachelor's degree. Even occupational therapy, you have to have a graduate degree, and they're even talking about you have to have multiple graduate degrees. Now, industry wants to be able to hire engineers at the bachelor's level, and there's issues about accreditation at different levels. Our recommendation is that we allow more flexibility in accreditation, and departments think about pre-engineering, or the first 4 years, is a more liberal arts kind of degree that allows you to specialize in some area, but then go on to professional degree programs. It might allow more pathways to the profession, because right now it's very hard if you didn't get an undergraduate degree in engineering or something was intensely math and physics oriented, it's going to be very hard for you to get a graduate or professional degree. So something we just wanted a little more creativity to think about. But then the next issue in terms of globalization, I wanted to look at gender. There was a book out by Virginia Valian called Why So Slow? Why are women not progressing? You know, we thought with the sexual revolution and civil rights that things were going to change very quickly. Why has progress been so slow? And partially this study was motivated by the former president of Harvard, who had made 3 predictions at an ad hoc conference. His first observation of why women are progressing so slow, particularly in the math and sciences, actually, people don't remember number 1 because they remember number 2. But number 1 was women don't work hard enough. I'll let you figure that one out. We actually did a study of how hard women work at Berkeley, and they were working 20 hours a week more than men, and this was self-reporting, but single women and single men were working about the same, so it kind of validated it was the married women with children that were working so many more hours. Number 2 was maybe there is a biological basis. Women just don't do math, and so maybe there's an issue there. And so, or maybe there's a biological basis of why women aren't successful. So we went through a lot of studies, I mean, huge number of studies. I remember the rat studies. We looked at rats injected with male and female hormones and how they ran around in cages. I mean, we really, really studied this issue. What was really interesting is there was nothing that came out to show why you couldn't really go to a biological basis why women weren't going into math and science. Some fields with the SAT test, women actually outscore the boys. Some countries, so you know, in Iceland, for instance, I think women did better than the boys. So does that mean genetically Icelandic women are different? And clearly the women in Japan totally did better than the boys in the U.S. on the math score. So, you know, there were just whole many variations, but we couldn't really find any correlation to issues to success. But we found out that Larry's third issue actually was the dominant one, and he said it was his tertiary issue. Maybe there's structural barriers. Maybe there's some kind of discrimination, and we found all kinds of structural discrimination. And we tried to analyze the structural, because you know, it's very clear what the structural discrimination is, but what do you do about it, okay? Because some of it is cultural, some of it goes back to, you know, pre-college. So here are some interesting statistics that we looked at, and the reason I want to share this with you is this flat world concept, because I think there's a difference of where we hire, the values we have, and then where we hire for our faculty. So this, I know it's a busy chart. The very bottom line is what most universities do for affirmative action required by federal law to look at in each discipline we hire from, and this just happens to be, I think, social sciences, but a very similar pattern in almost all disciplines. We look at what is the U.S. pool of PhD graduates, okay, and then we want to hire and we want our applicant pool to be a comparable percentage for equity, right? So if we're graduating 50% women in a field, we're hoping that 50% women apply to faculty positions, and then we have fairness and equity, and then 50% on average get hired as assistant professors, 50% get promoted, and so on. Well, it's not working that way. So what's going on? The red is white women, for instance, and you see that in a U.S. poll, women are 40% in this field graduating with PhDs, but in the applicant pool to UC Berkeley, they're only 28%. So why are they applying for faculty positions at a lower rate? And we found the same issues applied in the sciences and engineering. Why are they applying at a lower rate? Does anybody know? Yes? So maybe they've already seen the discrimination or the environment. Maybe they don't like the environment. I heard someone say today, "I don't want your life." One of his students said, "I don't want your life." Maybe they're applying at a lower rate. So they at least appear to be applying at a lower. Look at what group is applying at a much higher rate. I mean, it's interesting. Asian men is the light blue. The pool in the U.S. is 3%, but they're applying at 8%. It's almost 3 times as much they're applying. Well, one thing this chart doesn't show is the U.S. applicant pool for assistant professor positions are international. So we don't even know what the available pool is internationally. I've never seen a study that actually has in different disciplines the number of PhDs at comparable research that you might hire from comparable research universities. So there's a difference there. At this meeting that I was at, we were looking at transnational gender issues, and I looked at some of the other statistics, and one was University of Tokyo, which was interesting. Tokyo actually had almost a reverse trend from undergraduates to masters to doctorates. They had an increase, which is interesting, and I think this is the reverse of what's happening with the flat world, because the undergraduates, they're drawing on their own population, which is only producing 19% that are applying to University of Tokyo, which is a high pyramid system. They have all kinds of exams. The only very top people go to University of Tokyo. Their master's and doctoral students are a little more international. They're drawing in more students, for instance, from China. There are more women that are graduating with PhDs from China. And then the pyramid goes back when you go up to lecturers, associate, full professors. University of Tokyo, I think maybe one of the very largest universities in Japan, has 0 women chairs, deans, people in administrative positions. So it's kind of interesting. If you hire a PhD from University of Tokyo, what context do they bring with them when they come to your university? There's a different set of values and context that different graduates in different programs might bring to you. I won't go over this slide because it was the feminist focus group, but I have to tell you, they were in as much despair during the focus group as the minorities. I think the big difference had to do with family-friendly policies, though. They were much more interested in family-friendly policies. We did a study of various aspects of climate, and I don't know whether Northwestern has done a gender climate study or not. But we also looked at retention issues and why is it that faculty leave us? And I think I heard in the College of Engineering here, actually, there's been a turnover of women faculty. It looked like a high retention rate to me, so it might be something you want to look at. There was a gender difference in terms of salary. Men were much more, the reason that they cited for leaving was much more likely to be salary than women. So when you're working on retention cases, you might be a little more creative. It may not just be the money that's the issue. But I've highlighted a few things that were important. Of course, there's the two-body problem. But look at that bottom row in terms of shared values, and I think this has to do with the disparity of some of the focus groups. A commitment to diversity. They left because they felt there was not a commitment to diversity, which was important to them. Look at the underrepresented minority in the right. 30%, over 30% of our underrepresented minority felt that at Berkeley, which we work really hard to have a culture of diversity, left because they didn't think it was a serious commitment to diversity. So I think about retention, that's a huge issue. How many times, as you as a department chair, worked with someone and said, well, look, are you leaving because we didn't have a big enough commitment to diversity? You may not even ask that question. Look at what the men said to that question. Only 2% felt that was an issue in leaving. So already you have a population of people that are in a larger culture in which there's a disparity of shared values. So 30% of the underrepresented minorities felt the commitment to diversity was a major problem and why they left, only 2% of the men. And then if you look at the women, it was 13% of the women. So the women are somewhere in between, but you can imagine if you have populations of people that have one shared value that's not shared by the majority, it makes it an uncomfortable place to be and may not be reinforced in terms of a commitment to diversity. So something to think about. And then I just wanted to bring it back to the flat world. We looked at where our graduate students come from, and are they coming from countries that have gender equity in their graduating classes? And so that might say something about their attitudes about diversity when they join our faculty. And it was kind of interesting. It wasn't what you would expect. So for instance, China actually has a higher percentage of women going into engineering than Italy. Italy has one of the lowest, European countries. Why is it that Italy, at least those going to Berkeley, have a very small percentage of women in engineering? So what does that mean when they join the faculty in terms of the context of the university? This is an edgy issue. I mean, clearly I'm walking on a fine line of political correctness and everything else, but I do think we need to explicitly address shared values and how we develop shared values and how do we measure excellence. Because part of what we should hire faculty on is a commitment to what we want to be excellent in. And according to some of those focus groups, they felt that a commitment, an excellent commitment to diversity really wasn't there. There wasn't excellence in that commitment to diversity. There might have been excellence in research or something else, but not excellence along all dimensions for the academic environment. Here's another interesting statistic which may say something also about kind of a generation gap on happiness. And I don't know if you've done any studies here at Northwestern on this, but there had been reported that younger women don't see the discrimination that older women were seeing. And so younger women didn't feel they needed to be a feminist, or younger women felt that gender equity issues had all been solved, and the older women were not feeling happy, and some of the dissatisfaction were with older women. So we asked a bunch of questions that were associated maybe with, do your colleagues like working with you, different factors that might be associated with happiness. This is an example, but I could have shown you any number of questions that look like this. This question was, are you given lines and opportunities to collaborate? Do your peers value you? Would have been another one. As you can see, the men and women are pretty good. In fact, more women were happier, felt more satisfied. A higher percentage of them did feel that they were given opportunities to collaborate. And then as they become full professors, it totally changes. The men get happier and happier, and the women get unhappier and unhappier. And we used to think, well, maybe it's a demographic, people like me have chips on our shoulders, we're burned out, I don't know. But it's turning out to follow and track even the younger women as they move up into the profession. So it's something to reflect on what's going on here. One theory is that we patronize the younger women. We know that they're low in numbers, we have to help out, but as soon as they get professional enough, they succeed enough and become a threat, then they're a threat. You've got to duke it out with them. Another theory by Virginia Valian is the 1,000-cut theory, that you don't recognize micro-discrimination. It has to add up. You don't see the little time you were passed over or your salary. I understand there was some salary, looking at salary inequities. All right, so my salary's a little lower. Well, they made it up for me next year. You don't see the little inequities until they pile up, and it takes years for those to pile up. So that's Virginia Valian's theory about the 1,000 cuts and the micro-discrimination. So finally, our recommendations were at many levels, and this is the Beyond Bias and Barriers book with the National Research Council. And it was at various levels. It said you had to have leadership. We looked at the success cases, all the success cases, and there were never really some stellar success cases. There were just some that were better than others. Had leadership from the top, but had very motivated, engaged people from the grassroots as well. And it needs to involve department chairs are really key in changing attitudes. And who we select as department chairs, it's interesting, the whole selection process. We look at evaluation all along the way. And we look at, I know at Berkeley, I was chair of our faculty senate, and we actually, at Berkeley, a very strong senate, and we actually do tenure and promotion. And we make recommendations to administration, which 99.9% of the time they follow our recommendation. And so we look at teaching and research and service. We actually changed the academic manual to value diversity because it should have always been there in teaching, research, and service. Sometimes it was overlooked, so we re-emphasized it. And, you know, I think from the faculty level, in the evaluation, it's all there. All the mechanisms are in place. But we found out the department chair was kind of a barrier. Either the department chair wasn't passing on contributions, wasn't putting packages together to highlight the contributions, and that also when faculty were being hired, they weren't necessarily hiring on all those three dimensions. Were they hiring on excellence in research, excellence in teaching, and excellence in service and commitment to diversity? So looking at all of those in terms of the pool, and some good recommendations there. The one I'd like to leave with is the one that came up at Yale yesterday, that we really would like to compare notes and expose our data with the idea that sunshine and fresh air can solve a lot of the problems and will help us really identify good practices and what are sometimes called the exceptions, the deviants. We can emphasize the deviants and find out the deviants and see what's going on with this deviant behavior of success. So I would encourage, if you could consolidate some of the data at Northwestern and expose it in a standardized way, because there's a movement for the scorecard here, to have the data out there, expose it on your websites. Let's do some comparisons and let's really try to understand what's going on in terms of gender equity in academia. And all three of these reports, by the way, are available on my educational digital library called the Engineering Pathway. You can type in Engineering 2020 or type in Beyond Bias. And what's interesting about the Beyond Bias report is it is our most commented resource. There's 124 resource comments on this report, including Rush Limbaugh made a comment as well. So, so if you want to see it was controversial, we certainly have it there. So I just want to end with that and kind of this edgy issue of the flat world. And I do embrace the flat world. I love traveling. I love the diversity of cultures. I said I started out in anthropology. I clearly love multiple cultures. But what does that imply in terms of academic institutions? And what does that imply in terms of shared values? And what does that imply in terms of how we define excellence and how we achieve our goals of excellence? Thank you.